When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, Britain felt something it hadn't felt in 70 years. The crown suddenly felt fragile. Streets filled with silence. Flags sank to half-mast. And the royal family, usually guarded and composed, seemed shaken to its core. But while the cameras focused on the public grief, something far more intimate happened behind the palace doors. In a quiet corridor inside Balmoral, away from the state officials and rehearsed protocols, Prince William stood beside his grandmother's portrait, the one she loved most. Those who were present said he didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared, as if replaying decades of memories only he knew how to carry. William wasn't just losing a monarch. He was losing the woman who taught him how to walk into a room with dignity, how to stay silent when the world demanded noise, and how to bear the weight that comes with destiny. And in that stillness, that moment between duty and heartbreak, William made a decision that went against a royal tradition older than his father, older than his grandmother, older than most living Britons. A tradition every heir was expected to follow without question. But William broke it, not out of rebellion, not out of defiance, but out of love. A final private act to honor the grandmother who shaped the man he became and the king he will someday be. Most people think they know the royal family, but very few know this story. Because the tradition William broke was never meant to be broken, and the reason he did it was never meant to become public. For more than a century, every heir to the British throne has lived under a silent rule, one rarely discussed publicly, but followed with absolute precision inside palace walls. The heir does not walk behind the monarch. The monarch walks behind the heir. It sounds simple, almost ceremonial, but within the royal household, this tradition carries enormous symbolism. The crown must always appear steady, confident in succession, and prepared for the future. The heir is presented as the next in command, the living continuation of royal stability. Queen Elizabeth followed this rule. Prince Philip followed it in support. Prince Charles, for decades as heir, followed it without fail. The message was always the same. If anything ever happened to the monarch, the heir stands ready, visibly, symbolically, unmistakably. But there was one exception. One moment in history when the tradition was broken. And it happened on the day the Queen's coffin left Balmoral for the final time. As preparations were underway for the funeral procession, senior aides expected Prince William to follow the tradition like every heir before him, to walk ahead maintaining the strict ceremonial hierarchy. But William quietly refused. He insisted on walking behind the coffin, not beside his father, not ahead as the future king, but directly behind his grandmother, a place reserved only for the closest of the immediate family, rarely for heirs. At first, the staff pushed back. This was not how things were done. Protocols had been rehearsed and approved. Positions had symbolic meaning. Photographs would last a lifetime. But William didn't waver. Sources later shared that he said something simple but profound. A line that left the room silent. "Today I am her grandson first." For William, this wasn't a royal moment. This wasn't the day to think about succession optics or the crown's choreography. This was the final goodbye to the woman who guided him through every storm, from losing his mother at 15 to enduring the intense public scrutiny of adulthood, to navigating the evolving shape of the monarchy. He remembered how she held his hand at royal engagements when he was young, how she would whisper advice gently but firmly, how she told him again and again duty is nothing without compassion. And so William chose compassion over protocol. He broke tradition so he could walk behind her one last time, not as the next king, but as a grandson, honoring the only constant female figure who helped raise him. For the palace, this created an unexpected situation. It meant adjusting the formation. It meant reshuffling the order of senior royals. It meant bending a rule that had held strong for generations. But something remarkable happened. No one objected. Not King Charles, not the staff, not the household, not even the tradition-bound courtiers who often resisted any deviation from the old ways. Because in that moment, everyone understood this wasn't about the monarchy. This was about the human heart inside the monarchy. Millions watching around the world might not have realized it, but those who did saw something historic, a future king, choosing sentiment over symbolism, choosing love over protocol. And for the first time, the crown felt not just ancient and powerful, but deeply human. For most people watching from home, Prince William's position in the procession seemed like a small detail, the kind easily missed amid the weight of national mourning. But inside the palace, where every step, every gesture, every placement is steeped in symbolism, William's decision was monumental. To understand why, we must understand what royal traditions are truly designed to protect. For centuries, the British monarchy has survived not because it modernized quickly, but because it rarely changed at all. Its power wasn't rooted in political influence, but in continuity. The idea that no matter how uncertain the world becomes, the crown remains steady, timeless, and predictable. This is why ceremonial traditions are treated almost like sacred scripture. They're not about preference, they're about survival. And among the oldest of these traditions is the visual hierarchy. During royal processions, the monarch at the center, the heir positioned to signify readiness. When Queen Victoria died, when George V passed, when George VI's coffin was carried through London, the heir was always visible, always steady, always symbolic of the future beyond the loss. It sent a message to the public: do not fear change. The next guardian of the crown is already strong. So when William broke the tradition, it shook something deeper than protocol. It shook the monarchy's carefully constructed image of unbroken succession. But here is what made his decision extraordinary. He understood the risk and accepted it. Because in his mind, this wasn't the moment to assert the future. It was the moment to honor the past. And that choice revealed something profound. William wasn't just inheriting the monarchy. He was redefining it. The palace reaction. Quiet shock wrapped in respect inside the household. William's request created confusion. Senior officials had memorized the order weeks in advance. Security teams had rehearsed precise formations. International broadcasters had camera positions mapped down to the inch. Changing William's position meant re-coordinating almost everything. Some courtiers, especially those loyal to older traditions, were anxious. Would this look incorrect? Would the media misunderstand? Would it appear disorganized, even disrespectful? But King Charles, grieving deeply yet watching carefully, made a decision of his own. He nodded. A single nod, but one that signaled everything. Let him walk where he wishes. Charles understood his son in a way only a father could. He knew William wasn't seeking attention. Irony, given his position as future king. He wasn't trying to challenge the monarchy. He wasn't trying to rewrite the rules. He was simply trying to honor the woman who shaped his entire life. And for a brief, powerful moment, even the monarchy's strictest guardians recognized the truth. Grief has no hierarchy. Loss has no order of precedence. On that day, William stood not as the heir, but as a grandson. The public reaction. A moment of humanity. The nation needed. Strangely, the palace's greatest fear, public misunderstanding, never came true. Viewers around the world noticed his placement. Commentators quietly pointed it out. But instead of criticism, something else happened. People felt closer to the monarchy than they had in years. Because William's act of defying tradition didn't weaken the crown, it humanized it. In a world where the monarchy is often seen as rigid, distant, or trapped in ritual, William's choice whispered something the public had been longing to hear. We feel as you feel. We grieve as you grieve. We are a family too. The crown did not fracture that day. It softened, it warmed, it breathed. And in doing so, it became stronger. To understand why Prince William broke tradition on the day of his grandmother's final farewell, we must step far behind the palace gates, into the private, unspoken bond between a future king and the woman who quietly prepared him for a life he never chose. William never described it publicly. He never needed to. Those who knew the Queen well often said she had a silent closeness with her eldest grandson, a closeness built on shared loss, shared duty, and an almost unspoken understanding of what it meant to carry the crown's weight before you were ready. When William was just 15 years old, he stood beside his grandmother after walking behind his mother's coffin, a moment that shaped him forever. And it said the Queen, in one of her rare moments of vulnerability, told him softly, "Duty will ask much of you, but it must never take your humanity." Those words stayed with him, not just through his teenage years, not just as he trained at Eton, not just as he entered adulthood under relentless media scrutiny, But through every private audience he had with her, those quiet weekly meetings where grandmother and grandson spoke not as monarch and heir, but as two people bound by the same destiny. It was during one of those meetings, years before her passing, that the Queen shared another moment that would later echo in William's heart. She had been reflecting on the early years of her reign, the sudden weight she carried after losing her father far too young. And she told William something that surprised him. "If I could change one thing, I would have walked with my father one last time. Not behind him as the monarch, but beside him as his daughter." William never forgot that sentence. Those close to him say he reflected on it often, especially after becoming a father himself. He understood what she meant. The monarchy's traditions were powerful, but they could also distance the people who needed closeness the most. And so, on the day the world said goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II, that memory became the compass guiding his heart. He remembered her regret. He remembered her wisdom. And he remembered that she always placed family above ceremony when the moment truly mattered. The final conversation William never spoke about publicly. In the final months of the Queen's life, when her health had begun to fade quietly, William visited her alone at Balmoral. This meeting wasn't recorded in photographs, and it wasn't mentioned in official briefings. It was, according to those familiar with the family, a deeply private moment between the woman who raised 2 generations of heirs and the man who would one day inherit everything she protected. They spoke, as they often did, about the future of the monarchy, about duty, about the tremendous pressure that would fall on William when his father eventually became king. But toward the end of the conversation, the Queen said something that would define William's actions months later. "When the time comes, let love guide you, not tradition." For William, a man raised within rules older than any modern institution, this was more than advice. It was permission. Permission to lead differently, to modernize gently, to choose heart over rigidity, to carry the crown not just with strength, but with kindness. And so, when the day arrived, the day he stood behind her coffin, the day tradition demanded he walk ahead, William made his decision, not out of rebellion, not out of defiance, but because the woman he loved most in the world had already told him the answer. He walked behind her, exactly as she once wished she had walked with her own father. He honored her not as the future king, but as a grandson fulfilling a promise no one else knew existed. And that, more than anything, is why that moment became one of the most personal acts of love in modern royal history. In the days that followed, Queen Elizabeth II's funeral, commentators across the world analyzed every detail, the flowers, the music, the uniforms, the symbolism. But what they couldn't fully see, what cameras could never truly capture, was the quiet transformation taking place within Prince William. Because breaking tradition wasn't just a gesture of grief. It was a final message, a message meant for the future rather than the past. Those close to William say that in the months after his grandmother's passing, he carried a renewed clarity. He felt the weight of the monarchy more sharply, yes, but he also felt its purpose more deeply than ever before. For 70 years, Britain saw a queen defined by disciplined composure and unwavering duty. But William saw something even more profound, a grandmother who understood that the crown survives not only through strict tradition, but through humanity. And now he carries that lesson with him. He leads with a quieter confidence. He interacts with the public differently. He chooses transparency over distance, empathy over rigidity. He allows himself to be seen not just as the future king, but as a father, a husband, and a grandson shaped by loss and love. And in many ways, this is exactly what Queen Elizabeth hoped for. She lived through wars, crises, scandals, and sweeping cultural change. Yet she always returned to one timeless truth. The monarchy endures when it remembers the people it serves. William's choice to break tradition was not a rejection of the past. It was a tribute to it, a tribute to her. A tribute to the woman who guided his steps when he was a boy, who comforted him when the world felt unbearably heavy, who taught him that strength without compassion is hollow, and who trusted him to become a new kind of king, one shaped not only by duty but by heart. And so, when he walked behind her coffin quietly, deliberately, lovingly, it wasn't just a moment of mourning. It was the beginning of his reign in spirit, long before the crown ever touches his head. A future king honoring a grandmother's final lesson, that the crown's greatest power is not tradition, but humanity.